Hello, everyone. So this lecture is going to finish up our discussion of Goffman in the context of total institutions and this whole issue of a moral career occurring within the total institution of boot camp. So in class, we talked about first we talked about what a total institution is, how there is typically a moral career that goes along with it. So these changes in moral status in terms of how one views oneself and others. One phase of that career is the mortification phase, or the mortification of self, and that occurs generally when people enter total institutions and they are subjected to humiliating, embarrassing, degrading activities. And these are generally designed to destroy one's pre-existing sense of self. And we went through various activities in various ways that the self is mortified in general, and it also related it to specific practices we can see at boot camp, which is the focus of your paper. Now we want to talk about the second phase, which is the phase of sacralization. And in the sacralization phase, what we mean is how a new sense of self is ceremonially recognized, affirmed, and celebrated. So mortification is about destroying the old sense of self. Sacralization is about recognizing and celebrating the new sense of self that's emerging as one progresses through a total institution. And in boot camp, we see this transition occurring as one goes from being a recruit to a soldier. So what do we see in the documentary? We see that first when the people are on the bus, they're civilians. As soon as they step off the bus, they become recruits, and that's immediately when they're hit with the aspects of mortification. However, over their time, after their sense of self, their pre-existing sense of self has been eroded and undermined, and then rebuilt. We see this rebuilt self being affirmed, recognized, and celebrated as one transitions from being a recruit towards being a soldier, as one kind of officially becomes part of the Navy. And as part of this process, what we see is that new forms of deference are paid to recruits as they near graduation. Right? And in general, deference are ways in which you kind of respect or honor other people and celebrate them and your relationship to them. And that, in general, is what deference means. Now, as we know from Goffman, there's two specific forms of deference that he talks about. One is avoidance rituals, right? Where people respect that ideal space, a phrase that Goffman adopts from Zimmel, that surrounds that person, and where being distance and showing distance equals respect. And we see that when recruits get off the bus and they end on the mortification stage, right, that the recruits are not afforded avoidance rituals by their commanding officers, that ideal space is violated as drill instructors get into their face, shout at them, point out all the flaws and mistakes they're doing, treat them in a degrading way, right? So avoidance rituals are not generally respected in the mortification phase. But over time, we see that the commanding officers increasingly do respect these boundaries, so they increasingly afford soldiers these avoidance rituals. And so how do we see examples of this from the documentary? Well, as you see over time, the instructors increasingly don't get into the recruits' face and shout at them and yell at them and point out all their mistakes. Increasingly, that sphere around them, the recruit self, is respected. So, as the instructors come to treat the recruits in a less invasive way and invading their personal space as they show them more distance, as they show them more deference, right? We see a new sense of self being respected and celebrated. And again, we can see this in terms of how the commanders talk to the recruits. They're generally not shouting at them, and then they're also respecting their physical space, or at least they're respecting it more than when the recruits initially come in. So, as avoidance rituals are increasingly respected, that means the recruit's sense of self, this new self, is increasingly respected as well. But we also know that another way you can offer deference to someone is through presentation rituals. And in general, what presentation rituals are things that affirm or celebrate or recognize something special about the other person, right? And so here, kind of proximity or recognition is a way of showing respect for this other person. And we can see examples of this in boot camp. One aspect of it, and one way in which presentation, or one form that presentation rituals can take, that Goffman talks about, are salutations or greetings. Toward the end of the movie, there's a scene after, I think it was called the mansplain, like their big final test that the recruits have. They're all standing in line, and the drill instructor is walking down the line and shaking every recruit's hand. The fact that he is shaking that recruit's hand means that he's recognizing that person as an individual, and that represents a presentation ritual. You are acknowledging and respecting this person and celebrating him or her. So that is a presentation ritual. Also, at the end of the movie, right, we see the official graduation of the recruits. So when they officially become sailors, that entire presentation is a celebration for the recruits and recognizing that new sense of self, right? That's recognizing that these people have been transformed into sailors. And so that entire celebration is largely a presentation ritual respecting the new sense of self that's emerged among the recruits and recognizing their transition from one status group recruit into another sailor. We also see over time that new forms of deference are allowed for the recruits. Demeanor is allowed for recruits. And in general, demeanor refers to things like how you hold your body, so comportment, how you hold your face, your facial expressions, and also things like dress. And in general, your demeanor is a reflection of how you view yourself, and then also how others should be able to approach and interact with you. And if you have a good demeanor, then you're generally inviting. If you have a poor demeanor, that can show that you have a bad sense of self. You're not respecting yourself, and that you may not be a trustworthy participant in an interaction with another person. And that, in general, that's what demeanor means. And we see in the beginning of boot camp that the drill instructors don't allow sailors to have good demeanor, or there's cases where they don't want them to have good demeanor. So, for example, they have to, say, do push-ups, so they have to hold their body in a particular way, or they get punished by having to do sit-ups and stuff like that. Those are all cases in which demeanor is attacked or not respected. And we also see in the kind of uniforms that they have, that they wear the most basic uniforms, and that there are differences between what they wear and then what the more senior folks wear. But in boot camp, we can also see, and that all occurs in the mortification phase. In boot camp, we can see where new forms of demeanor emerge and then allow for a different kind of self. And again, these are concentrated towards the end of the movie. But also in that line where the drill sergeant was walking down and shaking everyone's hand, he also gave them a new hat. Clothing is one way in which you can express demeanor. The hat that he gives them, the first hat that they are wearing during the drill, said recruit on it, acknowledging their status category. However, as they're walking down the line, the commander shakes this person's hand and also gives him or her a new hat. And the new hat says Navy, symbolizing a transition from civilian to sailor or recruit to sailor. So, new forms of dress allow for a new sense of self and a way of reflecting that sense of self. So, as a change in demeanor, right, that celebrates this new sense of self that's emerging through the sacralization phase. The second aspect of it, too, is that when the recruits graduate, they're able to wear the Navy whites. So they're able to wear the official uniform of the Navy. And again, that change in demeanor, that change in dress allows them to express a new form of self and one that is celebrated by other people around them. So when you thinking about your paper, and this is also reflected in the movie, there's probably going to be more instances of mortification because that was focused on more. So in the body of your paper, maybe 60 to 65, maybe perhaps even 70% of your paper will be focused on the mortification aspect. But there is also the sacralization processes as we see changes in deference and changes in demeanor. And then these reflect a new sense of self that's ceremonially recognized, affirmed, and celebrated. And one final point with this, both the mortification phase and the sacralization phase, we can go back to the main point that Goffman is trying to make, that our self is contingent upon institutional arrangements and also the actions of others. For the recruits, their ability to present themselves in particular ways is very much influenced by the environment that they're in and what they're allowed to do and what they're afforded. So in things of like deportment, the clothes that they can wear, those are controlled by this institution. What they can and can't do, how they have to hold their body, is also a function of the institutional environment that they're in, and also the amount of respect that they're given, either in terms of respecting one's boundaries, so practicing avoidance rituals, and then also whether they are recognized as an individual for doing certain thing. So engaging in presentation rituals, those are also a function of the institutional environment that they're in and the actions of others. So Goffman very famously says, right, for as much as we try to present a self, that self must also be complemented by institutional arrangements as well as how others treat us. And that's it. That's the main idea behind this part of the lecture. And then this will be something that I will see you discuss in your papers.